the arrival of the first group of Afrikaners in the United States, taking up President Donald Trump's offer to immigrate due to perceived persecution in South Africa, has ignited controversy on both sides. Well, joining us to discuss the implication is Joshua Meservey from the Hudson Institute. Hi, Joshua. So lovely to see you again.
Good to see you, Linda.
Well, there's a debate in South Africa, and it's now, in the US as well, over whether these individuals are refugees or even farmers. So what's your take?
Yeah, it's becoming a bigger issue, I would say, political issue in the United States. So it's starting the story and the debate around it is being picked up on podcasts and other types of media. Certainly, of course, on Twitter or X now. The debate rages there. So yeah, it's certainly becoming higher profile, particularly given this is a small group of people, but it is capturing a larger share of the American media attention. I wouldn't call it front page news, but maybe it's moving in that direction. And then more recently, you had the Episcopal Church, which traditionally has been involved in the domestic side of resettlement, saying it would not participate in and was ending its relationship with the federal government over this resettlement. So I expect the debate has just started, especially if we continue, if more and more Afrikaners come over this program.
So, what do you say to people who say that these people are being used as pawns in a bigger political game?
Well, I think politics are at play here, of course, but I also think that these Afrikaners chose of their own free will, of their own volition to participate. So no one forced them to, of course not. So in that sense, they are behaving autonomously and as is their right and their due. So yes, obviously there are politics on both sides of this, both on the American side and the South African side. But again, it was fundamentally the Afrikaners' choice to whether to participate or not. Well, one of the major critiques you'll hear is of this white genocide narrative, right? And yeah, my sense is, again, whether you agree or not with whether white genocide is happening, I personally don't think that's the scale of the problem. It almost doesn't matter in the sense, again, because the president has such wide latitude on these issues that he can make these types of determinations, and then the U.S. government is expected to implement them. So, in some ways, the debate around the white genocide issue on this particular element is irrelevant in a sense.
Yes, and I think what the South African government says that they're looking at the definition of either white genocide or genocide, and they're also looking at the definition of refugee and say, well, this doesn't fit.
Yeah, so right, the definition of a refugee is someone who's left their country. They're outside the borders of their country. Now, again, these are technical points that are somewhat irrelevant to whether the president has the authority to implement this type of program. So I understand the South African government wants to adjudicate the technicalities. I don't think that really helps them, frankly, in this situation. I think they have to deal with the substance of the problem, which is an American reaction to the violence in South Africa, to the highly discriminatory laws against whites in South Africa. There's some institutions in South Africa that have documented the number of these laws. There's over 140 of them. And then you add to that mix the fact that you do have national political figures like Julius Malema. I know he's not in the ANC. He was once part of the ANC, but he does lead a major political party. Sings his "Kill the Boer" song, a highly inflammatory, highly racialized, and violent, frankly, song. And I understand the explanations. This is part of the it's nostalgia for the anti-apartheid struggle and etc. But that's cold comfort, I think, and it requires a lot of faith in Julius Malema to believe that he just means this metaphorically or is harkening back to the anti-apartheid struggle. I generally take people at their word when they say things. So I think it's not at all implausible that if the likes of Malema had their way, you would see a concerted effort to persecute even further whites in South Africa. So I think that's part of this as well, is fear of where this may go, like where it's going, what the trajectory is. That is driving some of Washington's concerns.
So what kind of support would they now get in the US? You've been, involved in refugees and resettlement programs. Would they be assisted by the United States to settle?
They would be, yes. So my experience was about 2.5 years doing this in the foreign context. So I was based out in Nairobi, and that was the area we did it. So I'm less familiar with the domestic side, but I know enough to talk the basics. And yes, they will receive certain amounts of assistance. The program is designed to try to move recipients to self-sufficiency as quickly as possible. So there's various mechanisms for doing that, including sort of job training, I think, in some instances, English language training, which won't be an issue here. And there's an entire sort of constellation of organizations here domestically that are supposed to be helping or are contracted by the U.S. government to help in these types of situations. And then you also just have independent civic organizations. So my church, for instance, has helped with resettled refugees, and not at the behest of the U.S. government or anything like that, but just because it sees doing that type of thing as part of its mission.
Well, you mentioned one church group that said they don't approve of this. So generally among Christians, are people sympathetic or skeptic?
That's an excellent question. I don't know if I have a sense of how all of, or I can say definitively, I do not have a sense of how all Christians feel about this. I suspect there's a range of opinions. So obviously on the Episcopalian side, there's a divide within American evangelicalism, or American Christianity, Protestant Christianity, I should say. And Episcopalians are generally viewed as progressives on the progressive political side. I suspect politics is what drove the Episcopalians' decision here. Their reasoning was quite strange. I read the letter that they wrote, and they said because of their commitment to racial justice, they would not involve themselves in this. They also, and I don't, they didn't explain why it would be an affront to racial justice to help resettle white Afrikaners. So I thought that was a bit odd. And then they also said that they lamented the fact that there are other refugees, I guess in their eyes, more deserving refugees who were not taking advantage of this program. Again, I find that reasoning odd because that is always the case. It is never the truly absolute most desperate people who get into this program. The absolute most desperate people usually can't escape their own country, or they don't have access to the program for whatever reason. But that's never stopped organizations in the past from sort of engaging in persecution Olympics and seeing which one is truly the most persecuted. So my sense of the Episcopalian position is that this was really about politics for them. So you have, as I say, groups like that on who I would describe as on the sort of progressive left. But then you also have highly conservative elements of Protestantism and Catholicism. I'm not sure if they're as engaged in this question right now, because this seems currently to be more of a issue among like the secular right wing, let's say, and the progressive left. But within that progressive left, as I say, are groups like the Episcopalians.
Is there also resistance? People might say at the moment the US is basically closed for refugees, and then suddenly they take this group of white people.
Yeah, that is one of the criticisms. But the refugee program fundamentally exists for the good of the United States. That is actually the bottom line. That concern supersedes all other concerns, including humanitarian ones. Traditionally, the United States has been by far the most generous country when it comes to resettling refugees. The Trump administration, and I would actually agree with this sentiment, clearly thinks that right now the time is not right to engage in more resettlement, given the illegal immigration problem we've had, where we now have many millions of illegal immigrants inside the country. resettled refugees are not illegal immigrants. They go through a legal process, but I think the concern is still bringing in, yet more immigrants in this type of context. Uh, but again, that really has no bearing in some ways on this specific question, because the president has very broad latitude within these programs. The president traditionally or does set what's called the presidential determination, which sets the number of admits that will happen every year. That's entirely his prerogative, and it's also a prerogative of the executive branch to decide. If you read some of the statute language that governs some of these immigration issues, it is the executive's prerogative to decide what is in the national interest in these cases.
Well, in South Africa, some of the farmers' unions, one of them is Agri SA, and the president said that the farmers who own land are unlikely to take up the offer. So, would you say they simply, that they want to stay, and they actually just want more safety and more guarantees from Ramaphosa to act on crime?
Yeah, my sense is that is what most Afrikaners want. Um, uh, Many of them, as you referenced, own land and or other property, and I think they are disturbed, quite understandably, by the level of violence in the country. Now, unfortunately, that level of violence, uh, affects everybody. Or the unfortunate part is not that it affects everybody. The unfortunate part is that it's so high. And I suspect that it's not going to be the vast majority of Afrikaners who resettle under this program. We'll have to wait and see, I guess. Uh, but you also, I've listened to one interview with a woman who was resettled, and she suffered 4 different farm invasions, and that's incredibly traumatic. No one was killed, but came very close, and you can't keep betting that you can just it'll just remain close and not actually result in death. But even the mere fact of just being robbed in that way is highly traumatic. So, these people have very real security concerns, and obviously because they're leaving their native country.
Well, can we expect more South African refugees to arrive, or was this a once-off media spectacle?
My sense is that this is the beginning of a program. Now, who knows whether there will be a political deal with South Africa where the South African government might say, okay, we're going to, and I would urge the South African government to do this, we're going to prioritize farmers, for instance. And it's useful to remember farm murders are not only of whites. There's also black farmers who suffer this type of violence as well. Um, so prioritizing farm murders wouldn't even have to be a racial thing, because it would presumably, hopefully, if properly implemented, protect people of all races who own farms. So I think the United States is looking for real action on improving the security situation in South Africa. If they see that type of action, maybe then the 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 reason for this program will cease to exist. But there's a lot of variables, a lot of ifs involved in this, and for right now, I think we'll have to wait and see. But I do expect there to be more resettlement.
Well, Ramaphosa did this week pitch up at NAMPO, which is the grain producers, a congress there or conference there. So, apparently the first time in 20 years. So, is this a signal this might be putting pressure on him to do more?
I suspect he is feeling pressure because of this. As you noted, this is a massive story within South Africa, within the media, and even if you disagree, even if a particular South African disagrees with the exact justification for the program, whether you think there's a white genocide, for instance, or not in South Africa, there it has brought the question of violence back to the forefront. I would be my guess in the South African media. Now, you also, there will be, it'll be highly politicized in the South African context. So people will choose one side or another based at least in part on their politics. So you may have a backlash as well against the Afrikaners or against the United States or against the movements that the Afrikaners associate with. That's also possible. But I think, again, it would be very hard for this not to resurface the issue of violent crime, which affects all South Africans in a really dire way. And that it reflects poorly on the ANC and it reflects poorly on the South African government.
Well, President Ramaphosa is set to meet President Trump in Washington next week. So, what do you expect from that? What kind of pressure would the Trump administration put on Ramaphosa?
Well, I obviously the Afrikaner issue will arise, of course, and I'm sure that the president will also address the fact that there is a raft of laws that discriminate against white people in South Africa. Um, I'm not sure what other issues might arise. I think that President Ramaphosa uh, would make a mistake if he goes to Washington under the impression that he can just explain this to President Trump, explain why the president is wrong, and then that will solve all these issues. That would be absolutely the wrong approach to take. I think it'll go very, very poorly for President Ramaphosa if that's the approach he takes. I hope that he comes with a list of actions that they are prepared to take to repair the relationship, concrete actions that can move the needle or make progress on the whole range of issues that the United States is upset at South Africa about. I think that is the way forward to repair this relationship.
Yes, and of course, foreign policy with the Trump administration's unhappy about South Africa's stance towards Iran and Israel. So, do you expect that to be on the agenda as well?
I suspect it would be, yeah. I don't know exactly what specifics within those two fairly broad topics would be on the agenda. Probably the ICJ case, of course, which is sort of the focal point of a lot of Washington's grievances against Pretoria, and then just the friendliness of the ANC, especially, but also South African government to the the theocratic dictatorship in Tehran, especially as the Trump administration moves forward with maximum pressure campaign against Iran. Yeah, I expect there will be a lot to talk about.
And do you think that for Ramaphosa to arrive in Washington and think he's going to explain terms and terminology away is not going to wash? He's going to have to do something tangible.
Yes, I think he will absolutely have to do something tangible. I would highly urge the South African government to already start the process of doing something tangible that they can point to when President Ramaphosa meets with President Trump, because at this point, the South Africans, I think, have a pretty strong sense of what Washington's grievances are, and there's nothing stopping Pretoria from taking action on those grievances. If the President Ramaphosa comes, and if this is yet another listening trip, I think everybody in Washington is getting tired of the listening delegations. They were great to do, but now it's been a year and a half of listening. So at some point there needs to be action from the South Africans. And again, if President Ramaphosa thinks he's just going to explain to President Trump why President Trump is wrong about this stuff, and that will resolve the issue, I think the conversation will go very poorly.
So if Ramaphosa, goes there and explains and gives definitions, does he have just one shot at this before Trump starts ignoring him?
Yes, I think so. My understanding is that it was very hard to arrange this meeting. It's always hard to arrange a meeting with the President of the United States, but this one was particularly hard given the state of the relationship between the U.S. and South Africa. So, yeah, I think this is probably President Ramaphosa's one shot to, on this sort of personal, person-to-person, president-to-president level, make his case for South Africa and try to repair the relationship. If it goes poorly, then I expect that there will not be another such meeting unless things have truly dramatically changed in South Africa.
Well, Joshua Meservey from the Hudson Institute, thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda.